Let's go ahead and start with the first one, which is about kind of the themes of the actual debate itself around working class support, where people are trending, and more. Harry Enton over at CNN had a good summary of this. Let's take a listen.
It ain't what it used to be. You know, you go back to 1992, Bill Clinton won that union vote by 30 points. Hillary Clinton only won it by 12 points back in 2016. That was the lowest mark for a Democrat since 1984, Mondale versus Reagan. But look at where Kamala Harris is today. She's only leading by 9 points. That would be the worst Democratic performance in a generation, 10 points off the mark of Joe Biden, who, of course, won 4 years ago, was sort of that union guy, Union Joe, right? Won it by 19 points. She's 10 points off his mark, and the worst in a generation is margin among vocational and trade school grads in pre-election polling. Bill Clinton was leading that vote over George H.W. Bush by 7 points. Look at where Donald Trump is today over Kamala Harris, a 31-point advantage. When I think people think of the working class, they think of people who use their hands. And we know that Donald Trump has been going after that vote, and he is in a very, very strong position.
Well, that's one that's obviously been tracked for quite a long time. But when you put it together with the Latino vote as well, those are probably the two biggest changes in modern politics. Let's put that on the screen, please. This is from NBC News' poll, Telemundo. This is specifically with Latinos. It shows that Republicans now have some 37% of Latinos backing the party, as opposed to just 49% for the Democrats. First time that they're under 50 in modern politics. 23% supporting Latinos, supporting Trump back in 2020, 54% Democrat. 2016, it was lower. It was 20 versus 59. And in 2012, it was actually 21 and 62. So that massive increase in Latino support, some 15 points in the span of just a decade or so, is very significant for the Republican Party. It also does, if you split it apart with men, that's where things get even more interesting, because Matt Iglesias is actually out with a piece today about how to win back male votes. And he talks specifically about how if you look at men in basically all demographic groups, I believe it's every demographic group except for black men, that there has been huge increases in Republican support. A lot of this is gender gap stuff, which we've talked about like ad nauseum here on the show, but it is indicative of like where things go and for what messaging is. There's a reason why the whole January 6th thing is very targeted for these more like upper middle class and white voters. Not to say that people don't care about it, just statistically that's going to be the main one. Abortion too, you know, is, generally aligns with educational levels if you look at it. And then on immigration, it's the flip side. And I think that probably is the #1 reason why you see this increase in working class supporters, because of the bifurcation between the parties on the issue of immigration and it being the true like irreconcilable issue for the GOP, and then same for abortion amongst the Democrats. So anyway, I think it's fascinating just nonetheless. And no, don't let anyone tell you that American politics can't change, you know, like this.
Yeah.
This whole 40 years idea from James Carville was nonsense. The Obama coalition fell apart in a single generation. That's amazing, actually.
There's a reason they called it the Obama coalition.
Yeah, because it's gone.
It was the only one who could pull it. I mean, that man won Indiana.
Right.
Like,
didn't he win Ohio too?
Of course he won Ohio.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it was a totally different. Of course, he didn't win Georgia.
Yes.
Didn't win Arizona.
Right.
The map has shifted dramatically, but yeah, I mean, the college divide has become a central one, and you know, there are some things that really challenge my view of politics and what I would like to see, because the Biden administration, if we look at the economics, they've been way better than the Obama administration. Way better than, in my opinion, any on the long term, like industrial policy, labor policy, antitrust policy. They've been way better than any president in my lifetime. Now, I think in the short-term stuff, I think they screwed up a lot, right? Because the entire COVID safety net is dismantled under them. You have inflation. You have an inability to deal with that or really articulate what's going on there, not pointing fingers at the corporations who are gouging people, not taking any action, not taking a lot of action, I shouldn't say any, not taking a lot of action to rein that in. And, you know, that certainly plays into this. I think a lot of we're going to talk about some numbers out of Philadelphia that show that the lowest income areas are the places that are shifting right within the city. And I do think the immediate like inflation numbers have to do with that. But I also do think that our politics is it's becoming totally de-aligned. It's becoming very much about these cultural issues which the liberal set of cultural issues tends, like you said, Saagar, more to align with like higher education levels, and the conservative cultural landscape tends to align more with like high school, trade school, et cetera. And that's truly becoming the central divide. And the union numbers are the most indicative of that, because it continues to be the case that union membership is, more likely to lead you in the direction of voting Democratic. But, what we saw with like the Teamsters not endorsing, and the union vote in terms of the rank and file shifting to the right, so that Democrats are only more narrowly leading in that vote, it does indicate, because you have a very clear divide between the parties in terms of union issues, it just does indicate that the cultural issues, what some political scientists call like status issues, have become more central to American politics than economic issues. And it makes some sense when you feel like neither party, no matter who's in power, is really delivering for you economically. You can at least feel like you have a cultural warrior on your side on those issues. And I don't want to pretend like those issues don't matter either. Like, certainly a lot of people, women in particular, feel that abortion rights matter quite a bit in terms of their life and their ability to make their choices. But Trump is a big part of crystallizing this trend, but it's also a trend that we see across advanced democracies and across like Western society. And it's a trend that in some ways predates Trump as well, this realignment. So as with many things, I think he's an accelerant, but he's not entirely the entirety of the story that's going on here.
Yeah, I've recommended this book a million times, The Age of Acrimony, How Americans Fought to Fix Their Democracy, 1865 to 1915. It was written just in 2022. But the central story of post-Civil War America, and the reason why the Gilded Age was allowed to happen, is because the central dividing line in American politics was basically Reconstruction and whether black people should have rights and Jim Crow should be allowed. That was it. That was all we fought about. It led to the rise of Southern populism, down in the South, and the segregation and the rise of Jim Crow, on top of in the North and how much we hated the South. And at the same time, mass industrialization was allowed to happen. But the sad part is that actually is the time when Americans were most engaged. It was not on the progressive reformer issues that took decades of fighting basically about black rights before we ever had a conversation about it. So I think it's similar today with abortion and with immigration. These questions just have to be solved. One side has to win. Then we will litigate. And unfortunately, that's just the way that things are going. I mean, as you said, with the Philadelphia Inquirer wrote the story, I mean, this is the educational divide. Let's put this up there, please, on the screen. In deep blue Philly, working class voters are shifting towards Republicans. But it's not just saying working class voters. It really is bifurcated on income. Go to the next part, because this shows the slide more than anything else. If you see here, average net Republican vote shift, 2016 to 2020. So just 4 years, 0 to 10% in poverty, minus 25 towards Democrats. 0 to 16%, minus 20 Democrats. 16 to 24%, minus 9. But then once you get to the 24 and 35% of share of residents in poverty, swing of 13 points amongst Republicans. And the most significant is 35% or more. 35% or more, think about what that means, of share of residents in poverty precincts have now shifted plus 47 towards Republican. Of course, in our modern economy, that is almost entirely indicative of what educational levels look like. And that tells us that these cultural issues are the #1 reason that people are either shifting right or left, and is what determining them to come out and to vote. And so when you see this, I fully expect this to replicate all across the US. And it also tells us why the Sun Belt would drift a little bit more Democrat. These are the most dynamic areas. This is where the net population influence are all people who are college educated. It's also why the Midwest, the Midwest is going to have a lot more working class white support, but they will only be offset potentially by upper middle class white liberals and or seniors, who are a whole other thing that happens in America. But the point is that when the boomers die off, this is what America is most likely going to look like.
To me, one of the most interesting things happening in American politics as sort of an experiment is happening in Nebraska, where we've covered this Senate race. The Democrats just basically decided, like, we're not going to win a Senate race in Nebraska, so we're not going to even try. And there's an independent populist, Counterpoints interviewed him, named Dan Osborne, who was a strike leader, like very grounded in the labor movement. Populist economics are like the core of his pitch. He wants to secure the borders. He sort of tries to be more or less neutral on cultural issues, although he is, has expressed himself as being pro-choice, but really leans into that labor populism. And the latest poll that just came out, I don't know if it's accurate or not, has him up 5 points. An independent Senate candidate running on like a, left populist agenda and minimizing some of the cultural issues is winning or close in the state of Nebraska. And so if you're looking for like, what's the path forward, that seems like in the red states where the Democratic Party is just poison for like, and frankly, a lot of understandable reasons, where it's just poison, that seems to be a pretty good playbook for them to run. So that's the place that I'm watching with the most fascination in terms of like, democratic experiments and what could also kind of shake. Imagine he ends up being the 50th vote. Imagine how much power this union worker, labor leader, strike leader, imagine how much political power he ends up. Instead of Joe Manchin, we have Dan Osborne. Like, it can't possibly happen because it would be too exciting and too good. But the fact that he's even in the running is, I think, quite an extraordinary development and, should be an indication of some good directions to go in that really could kind of shake some of the bedrock foundation of the two-party system in a way that would be incredibly healthy.
You can always learn a lot from people like that. Even if he doesn't win, let's see what margin he puts up. If he comes within 2, that should be something that tells you. This is also why national parties need to let go of a lot of litmus tests. I think his name was Brian Sandoval. He was that governor of Nevada. He was pro-choice, and he was a Republican. He was massively popular in 2016. Totally ruled out because he was pro-choice. I remember looking at his approval rating and being like, hey, we've got a Latino Republican governor here with like a plus 70% approval rating, and we're all just going to pretend he's not national. Yeah, that's the thing. You get ruled out. I also forget who the governor was of I think it was Louisiana. He was a Democrat, John Bell Edwards. Yeah, there you go. John Bell Edwards, but he's pro-life. And so the same thing. He just gets totally ruled out. And something I always respected about Bernie is that even as early as late as 2017, he was endorsing pro-life Democrats as long as they were decent.
Got in a lot of trouble
he
for
got
that.
so much shit for it. But he was like, look, these are the only people that can win. I would rather they win as long as, they need to satisfy whatever things for their constituents, but let's do it. And those people need to be more elevated by the National Party, in my opinion, because in the future, if you want to contest more swinging areas, especially in a more 50-50 country where everyone's totally divided, that's the portrait of how you actually break open, something new.
Yeah.
That's what Trump did. That's what a lot of, this Bell Edwards and other figures, they were basically just kept out of the national conversation only because of national party litmus tests. And I think that's really stupid. I don't think it works.
Yeah, but it would be pretty cool if we got a new independent in the Senate.
That'd be great.
And what that would mean, and if his was up for grabs. He said to Counterpoints he didn't really plan on caucusing with either party, and so it's one to watch for sure. One to watch going forward.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.